Japan is all set to host the powerful G7 leaders. 7 leaders from the world's most powerful democracies have started to gather for the Group of Seven summit in Hiroshima. Japan Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be leaving for Japan today to attend the G7 summit. Prime Minister Modi will be the second Indian head of state to visit Hiroshima. During the summit, the G7 leaders will be discussing a wide range of issues from economic policy, security, nuclear disarmament to the Ukraine war. Ukrainian President Zelensky will also be joining the session virtually. So the G7 leaders will meet in Japan, in Hiroshima. The summit will be held. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also join the summit. And Hiroshima is Kishida's hometown. His choice of venue underscores a determination to put nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation at the top of agenda of this year's summit.
Well, this region is going to be increasingly important to our economic prospects at home. If you look at where global growth is going to come from over the coming decades, the Indo-Pacific region is going to be increasingly important. That's why I was pleased that the UK has now joined the CPTPP trade partnership. That's a landmark agreement. We're the first non-Pacific nation to join that trade agreement. It's going to mean more jobs for people at home. And we're also strengthening our security and our alliances in the region, particularly with Japan.
क्वाड के चारों देश कर रहे हैं कि हिरोशिमा में चारों नेताओं की शीर्ष नेताओं की उपस्थिति का फायदा उठाते हुए क्वाड की जो शिखर वार्ता है वो हिरोशिमा में की जाए। देखिए, क्वाड के जो सहयोग और सहकार्य और जो उनके सहयोग सहकार्य की प्रक्रियाएं हैं, उनकी संरचना इस प्रकार से है, उनका स्वरूप इस प्रकार से है कि क्वाड की शिखर वार्ता जब हिरोशिमा में होगी तो जो एजेंडा पिछली क्वाड की शिखर वार्ताओं में नेताओं के बीच में जिसके प्रति सहमति बनी है,
is a city of peace. India is a country of peace. And our position on Ukraine-Russia issue has been well articulated by our leadership in various occasions, including in the United Nations when we were the member of the UN Security Council, that India stands for peace. Our Prime Minister has made it clear that this is not an era of war, this is an era of peace.
And for more, I'm joined with my colleague Rishabh on the broadcast. So Rishabh, other than leading industrialized nations, bigger democracies of G7, developing countries have also been invited in G7. Choice of the venue has also a key significance. What is the agenda of G7 this year and what is on plate of India?
See, India is not a full-time member of G7. India is only a guest country for this summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting Hiroshima at the invitation of Fumio Kishida, the Prime Minister of Japan. And India will be part of only the guest summit and not the key summit of G7, given that India is still not the part of G7 countries. But while Prime Minister is there, on agenda would be for the most important nuclear disarmament. And that answers the key question that you asked, that what is the significance of holding G7 summit in Hiroshima. Nuclear disarmament is something that will be discussed at length. Climate is another thing that will be discussed. Then there is economic issues pertaining to the region and globe is also something that will be discussed. And the Indo-Pacific. Remember, Japan has been at the forefront when it comes to the Indo-Pacific policies and how a neutral, calm Indo-Pacific is a requirement of the world is something that Japan has been advocating, and that becomes the agenda of G7 as well. So these are the 4 key issues that will be discussed. Apart from that, there are bilaterals set up for India in Hiroshima. India is definitely meeting the Japanese counterpart for the bilaterals. Will there be a bilateral between India and UK as well as India and France? That is still being worked on. There are 3 slots for tomorrow, 3-hour slot tomorrow for the bilateral meetings, and definitely there will be more bilaterals that we are expecting. Apart from that, there will be Quad Summit as well in Hiroshima. Initially, this Quad Summit was in Sydney, but because Joe Biden, the President of the United States, has to return back to US for his domestic commitments regarding the Congress, he'll not be traveling to Australia, and that's the reason that the Quad Summit has now been shifted to Hiroshima instead of Sydney. So Quad Summit will also be discussed there. Remember, the Quad Foreign Minister Summit happened in Delhi in the month of February, where Jaishankar hosted the Quad members. Now the summit was supposed to be in Sydney, and that's the reason Prime Minister Albanese from Australia came to India to invite Prime Minister for the Quad Summit, but for unforeseen circumstances, it is being hosted in Hiroshima. So Quad Summit will also be there. Apart from that, in Hiroshima, there will be major discussion about Indo-Pacific region, and that is something that everyone is eyeing to, because that makes China uncomfortable.
Yes, certainly, Rishabh. Thank you so much for all these updates. So, a couple of bilaterals have been lined up for tomorrow. And meanwhile, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and US President Joe Biden met briefly and held a Japan-US summit meeting. With an eye on China, both the leaders exchanged views on regional issues on the basis of the recognition that any unilateral attempt to change the status quo by force in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in East Asia, must not be tolerated.